Do you often struggle with mental or emotional blocks? These obstacles often leave you with persistent negative thoughts, worry, or fear. Welcome to the Transformational Peace Podcast, and I'm Dr. Lee. In this episode, we will uncover the root cause of these blocks and offer some helpful solutions towards healing. And thank you for clicking on this video, and if it provides you with encouragement, please click the subscribe or follow button below. Also, please share this video with someone you feel might find this information helpful. Hello friends, thanks for joining me. And today we'll be discussing breaking through strategies for overcoming mental and emotional blocks. Mental and emotional blocks are common barriers that many individuals face in their lives. These blocks can stem from past traumas, negative thought patterns, fear of failure, or unprocessed emotions. They can manifest as self-doubt, procrastination, anxiety, or difficulty in forming healthy relationships. These blocks can hinder personal growth, affect decision-making, and impede one's ability to experience life to the fullest. So over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to do a two-part series dealing with mental and emotional blocks and, honestly, how mental blocks lead to emotional blocks. Let's start with emotional blocks because that's what most people are familiar with and relate to, and later in this video, I'll show the connection between mental blocks and emotional blocks. Emotional blocks are very important because this is when we bottle or repress our emotions. When we bottle, we suppress or conceal our feelings rather than expressing them openly. We often do this believing that we are maintaining control or avoiding conflict when in fact the opposite is true. We literally repress our emotions to cope with trauma, societal expectations, or just plain being overwhelmed by stress. This can lead to a range of negative consequences such as increased stress, depression, and relationship conflicts. This reminds me of a video I saw on YouTube not too long ago. There were these two small boys and they were walking out into what looked like this large parking lot. And one of them was carrying a liter bottle of Coke. And they got to a certain spot and the one little boy took and unscrewed the top of the Coke and he dumped like a third of it out and then he set it down on the ground. Then the other little boy came up and he pulled something out of his pocket. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but he took two little white tablets out and I thought, I'll bet that's Mentos. So he took those two little white tablets and he put them in the Coke bottle while the other little boy quickly screwed the cap back on and then they ran like crazy. It's kind of funny. And so they stood a little ways away. I'm imagining they had a third friend that was videoing for them. They stood there and they stood there and they stood there. And all of a sudden, boom, the Coke bottle blows up. Just as the pressure builds within a sealed bottle, unexpressed emotions can accumulate and eventually overflow, leading to outbursts, resentment, or even physical symptoms. So I imagine some of you are thinking, hey, that's me, or maybe you're thinking, do I do that? So I'll start by letting you know what I'm going to be talking about in this video. First, I'm going to give you some ideas of 4 different types of emotional blocking along with some helpful examples. And the reason for this is I understand how this will help everyone relate to or identify certain behaviors you might be experiencing. And in the second part, I'm going to talk about how having mental and emotional blocks affects basically your entire life. I'll begin discussing how mental blocks often lead to emotional blocks. So let's begin with the 4 different examples of emotional blocks. So the first type of emotional block is when you find yourself scrolling mindlessly through social media like possibly TikTok, which seems to be a fan favorite these days, or possibly Instagram, especially over the weekend when you have a work or class project due the first thing Monday morning. Or maybe you decide, this is the weekend I'm going to finish watching part of the latest season of Yellowstone. I actually had this happen with a college student I was working with some years ago. At the end of the week before midterms were due, he decided on Friday, I'll just watch a few episodes of Yellowstone before I start studying. And lo and behold, Sunday rolled around and he had watched the entire season. Needless to say, he didn't get much studying done. Often we go to great lengths to avoid thinking about how we feel, like playing video games, binge watching TV, or even oversleeping. Unfortunately, avoidance is a big signal that you're suppressing your emotions. The second type of emotional blocking could be having overly strong reactions to small or insignificant issues. I'm reminded of a younger couple I was working with, again, some years ago, and we hadn't been working together for more than a couple of months, but I noticed one session when they entered the room, they were unusually quiet. The tension was clearly palpable. As the wife began speaking, she began recounting an incident that had occurred literally right before the session. Apparently, she was unloading the dishwasher at home when she accidentally dropped the glass and broke it. Her husband immediately became upset and was verbally angry with her. His reaction was clearly misdirected and a sign of deeper, most probably more repressed feelings of anger related to something completely unrelated to his wife. And the third type is having a problem letting go of disappointment or anger or holding a grudge against others. When we have a problem holding a grudge against other people and or being vindictive, this is often a sign that you're suppressing or holding back your emotions. Sometimes we have difficulty dealing with our emotions and forgiving others due to the pain they may have caused us. When we hold on to our anger and don't acknowledge it, this could be a sign that we're not ready to deal with our feelings. We're simply choosing to not address it, and unfortunately, we let it simmer. And the fourth and last type is you feel like you're experiencing life from an observer or a third-party perspective. Possibly you've been on an outing with your friends and everyone is having fun and laughing. However, you feel very detached, almost as if you're observing from a distance. It's a little bit like the social anxiety discussed in a prior video where you're with a larger group of friends and you still feel detached and lonely. In other words, intimacy is difficult for you. So you bottle up your emotions and distance yourself emotionally from others, even though you're physically close because you're holding your feelings at arm's length. So let me give you a really good example of how feelings work. Let's imagine I give you a glass of water to hold, which is probably 8 ounces or so, which is about a half a pound. And at first I have you hold it at arm's length like this. Now you'll be able to hold it for a while, but after a while your arm will start to ache, and if you can hold it a little longer, your arm will probably become numb. This is how it is when we hold our feelings at arm's length. Now, there's some of you out there that are going to say, well, what if I hold it close like this? That'll be easier. Yes, that would be easier, but the same phenomenon is going to happen over again. You'll be able to hold it a little bit longer, but your arm will begin to ache, your arm will begin to get numb, and even though you're holding it close, you're still not dealing with your feelings, and it has an effect on us, a physiological effect. So for the second part of this video, I'm going to talk about how mental and emotional blocks affect our lives, especially our relationships. So a common complaint I often hear in clinic is people talk about being stuck. I'll often hear someone say, I've been thinking and talking about my emotions all the time, even with my friends, and I still feel awful. Or I've been working on my past trauma for some time now, and I still feel upset. And I know this is really hard, right? But usually right after saying these things, I'll hear them say, I'm tired of doing this and I want an answer. And herein lies the solution, because we need to look at the strategy we're using and why it doesn't work or is only giving us limited success. Simply because cognitive strategies tend to be solution or problem focused. And don't get me wrong, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy strategies are highly effective. However, we're talking about how cognitive strategies can sometimes be used as an emotional defense. I see this often with highly intelligent individuals I'm working with, and especially with GT kids, gifted and talented kids. And the common issue I see is using a cognitive approach to emotions in order to analyze them. This is where the problem lies. Analyzing our emotions is not embracing our emotions, and this is really important. And what happens with this analyzing is we have trouble identifying daily what we're struggling with. One day it's anxiety, the next day we're feeling down. We literally can't land anywhere because we're not really clear about what it is we're feeling. For example, one day we'll feel we're struggling with perfectionism, and we'll go to the internet to find a solution for perfectionism, which further distances us from our emotions. By the way, if this sounds familiar, this is very familiar to analysis paralysis I discussed in our last video. And again, the problem with most solutions is they are logical in nature and will most probably fail, especially when we're dealing with our emotions. In other words, embracing emotions is about accepting yourself and not fixing yourself. I get asked this a lot in clinic, and I have to take great care in explaining how fixing is usually a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And typically, after a short time after that, I'll get asked, if I just accept my problems and don't try to fix it, does it mean I'm just going to wallow in it, or am I just giving up? This is typically where I explain that wallowing is simply giving up your choice to embrace your emotions. If we give up and label ourselves wallowing, we're only further perpetuating our analysis paralysis. We have to work hard on not rejecting acceptance of ourselves, and this is often very difficult for many people. In other words, we have to get really good at being aware of our primary emotions like anger, fear, sadness, disgust, enjoyment, or joy. And these are just some basic examples of primary emotions. And the issues arise when we find ourselves dealing with these core emotions and struggling with identifying them. We at least have an awareness of our struggles, and we typically turn to coping strategies like staying on social media for hours and hours or overeating, which again are short-term solutions. These coping behaviors are signs of deeper core emotions that are not being addressed. We are literally distracting ourselves to avoid feeling our emotions, which clearly leads to larger issues. Consequently, we develop a significant aversion to our emotions, which we often perceive as negative emotions. In reality, all of the mental gymnastics we do are simply different manifestations or ways of dealing with these subsurface core emotions I mentioned earlier. Now, the trick in learning how to deal with them or embrace or accept our emotions, not to fix them, is learning how to reduce the emotional energy or intensity in order to better approach and understand them. One of the ways this is done is learning how mirroring or reflective listening works. Reflective listening, which is done with a professional, is when the listener, therapist, listens to and attempts to clarify and restate what was just said. This has two benefits. One, to increase the listener's understanding, and two, to help the other person clarify their thoughts and feelings. This process literally unpacks some of the intense emotions and experience so they decrease and become more manageable. And the behaviors and analysis paralysis thoughts also begin to decrease. Now, obviously, the process is a little more complex than that, but I think you get the idea. And once you learn these new skills, practice them. And when you feel anxious, instead of immersing yourself in social media or whatever, ask yourself, what am I trying to avoid by distracting myself? And a really good clue to understanding your anxiety is that it usually manifests itself as some form of worrying. And when we begin to worry, we typically experience our emotions as negative, which makes them easier to reject. And remember, the idea is to accept your emotions, which is the beginning of self-validation. And accepting our emotions is a key to rejecting continually trying to fix ourselves. Okay, let's clarify. Fixing our emotions keeps us stuck. Improving ourselves frees us up to learn new ways to validate ourselves and up our game. So if you're on a downward spiral and feeling broken and out of control, and believing that you're truly broken is a core belief, which I'll talk about in part 2 of the next video, and maybe you've been on social media or gaming for days, and you're probably caught in an overthinking trap or a form of analysis paralysis and overanalyzing. Try to recognize if possibly you are overemphasizing a cognitive or overthinking strategy as a way of avoiding your feelings. Try to remember that doing emotional work is not so much about finding solutions. It's about processing and giving yourself time to understand your emotions. Okay, that's it for this video, so make sure you check out next week's video, which will be part 2 of Breaking Through Strategies for Overcoming Mental and Emotional Blocks. I'll be talking more in depth about mental and emotional blocks, and I'll give you some practical, helpful techniques for dealing with them. And remember, Albert Einstein once said, "Stay away from negative people. They always have a problem for every solution." And frankly, the reason you're stressed is you have decisions to make and you're probably not making them. Stop using your energy to worry. Use your energy to believe, create, grow, and heal. I'm Dr. Lee.